I was so delighted to learn last fall that the board had authorized a subsidy for attending the beloved conversations. And then, perhaps partly as a result of that incentive, 19 of us lay members, plus Rachel and Rebecca, had enrolled in this intensive experience. But what was it going to be like? Having participated in, and indeed having facilitated, many such workshops in the past, would this just be more of the same? Delight was an understatement when I saw the title of the very first lesson: Celebration, Joy, and Imagining. This would be a very different approach. No more guilt inducing what we've done wrong and how to stop. Imagining, yes, indeed. And the list of resources for the first of our white lay people session wasn't just articles, which I've read a lot of, but included poetry, music, and visions. Not just reading and listening, each lesson included questions for reflection, questions for a critical friend, meeting with a learning pod, and creating a portfolio. What a lot to do. What an investment of time and energy. But throughout, as well, acknowledgement that our first task is always self care. Of course, we can't do it all. This is a bountiful buffet. This would indeed be different. And icing on the cake for me, I, who seldom respond to most poetry, found my very favorite poem was listed among the three cited in the very first lesson. You've heard it from me several times. The title is Vahafta, which refers to my ethnicity, as the original is a common Hebrew prayer. But Aurora Levins Morales' reinterpretation asks us to repeat daily, another world is possible. I came away from this first phase of beloved conversations believing that indeed another world is possible.
As Naomi told us, the theme of our very first session of Beloved Conversations was celebration, joy, and imagining. One poem in the resources that we looked at on our own even had imagination, or imagine rather, in its title. Imagine the Angels of Bread by Martin Espada has stayed with me. This poem begins with revolution and retribution. Oppressors and oppressed switch places in a world turned upside down. It then teases us with glimpses of liberation, rage replaced by hope. Next, we are called to act, to make this the year we create the world we dare to imagine. The mouths of the oppressed are filled not with bread from the angels, but with the very angels themselves. The voices of the downtrodden have been sanctified. They're holy. I was surprised to learn the author, Martin Espada, is now at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, a professor of English teaching poetry. I assumed he wrote his poem quite recently, perhaps in response to the rising sea of injustices ignored or even imposed during the last presidential administration. But in fact, Imagine the Angels of Bread, which seems so current, was published not 2 or 3 years ago, but 25 years ago, in 1996. Some themes are timeless, even though they shouldn't be. Will anything ever change? How can we possibly imagine that this is the year But if we are ever to succeed, imagine we must for the angels to come.
Good morning. I want to share a quote from my current favorite book about race, How to Be Less Stupid About Race. I love the voice of this Black, bisexual, queer, tenured professor who introduces herself as Crystal, or Dr. Fleming if you're nasty. She says, if you want to pursue the cause of social justice, give up the need for quick fixes and gird your loins for a long struggle. To sustain your work for the long haul, you'll have to build up your reserves of resilience, self-care, community care, and courage. You'll have to nurture your capacity for hope, humor, love, and connection. She goes on to say, what keeps me going personally is a deep and abiding commitment to spiritual practice and my experience of God's presence, not in a specific church, temple, or other place of worship, but in every face and every situation I encounter in this life. Laughter helps too, as does friendship and meditation and spending time in nature and really good wine. Although her book is not one of the resources for Beloved Conversations, when I began to reread it recently, I realized that Beloved Conversations had either given me or explicitly advised me to go find all the things she mentions, except the really good wine. Beloved Conversations. The very first questions for personal reflection, for conversation with myself, included what were my fears in doing the curriculum? Well, lots of fears, all boiling down to needing the integrity to become more visible to myself and others, but wanting to feel completely safe at the same time. On the face of it, impossible. But I will say that the curriculum folks for our white lay group were calm, loving souls who modeled how to remain okay while exploring difficult things. Another beloved conversation, personal reflection, another conversation with myself was, what in me needed to be strengthened so I could live into the future? And what did I need to give up? I had a lot of possibilities to pick and choose from there, but settling on an answer to each question has certainly helped me many times since. I discerned that I needed to strengthen my humility and give up some comfort. What was unique for me in Beloved Conversations was that it was preparation for anti-racism work that stands on a spiritual foundation. It offered that special invitation to brave space. It assured us we have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. What's ahead? For me, the eighth principle we have been talking about is an opportunity. Despite many of us acknowledging that we don't know how to do the work called for in the eighth principle, together as a community, we have an opportunity to start somewhere and continue to grow.
Before I signed up for the BC program, I asked myself if I was ready to dive into such a deep study and wrestle with what I discovered. How would I respond to a deep exploration of racial injustice? How would I manage the anger I was likely to feel and the existential guilt of being white? But I'm committed to doing my part and was curious to learn how to be more directly effective in making changes to racial injustice. Little did I know I would spend the next few months not just learning, but also unlearning. I had prepared to study. I got a special notebook to record important points and my favorite pen. But when our first meaning-making session began with music and poetry and inspiring messages, about caring for ourselves and each other as we do this work. I was unprepared. All primed for a rigorous intellectual endeavor, I was suddenly tapping my foot and singing along and feeling hopeful. Oh yeah, I forgot about hope, my body seemed to say. As I continued through the lessons, which included more music and poetry and essays and articles, it became clear that the most courageous thing I can do is examine the internalized, unconscious experience of my own white privilege. It can be very subtle, but when I take the time to genuinely notice the tiniest of feelings and fleeting assumptions, I begin to see how pervasive and unconscious my white conditioning has been. Beloved Conversations has helped me do this with a sense of self-forgiveness, knowing that the important thing is to do the work of becoming conscious. For me, this work is now an ongoing spiritual practice, not just for the issues of racial inequality, but also for how I am in the world. The vulnerability it takes to look honestly at my own assumptions and reactions has given me a greater tenderness with myself and others. I am more willing to risk being authentic, even if it's uncomfortable. And I have more compassion for people who are not willing or able to understand. What does all this have to do with racial inequality? Perhaps everything, or else we risk perpetuating the inequality we wish to eliminate. It is where we all need to begin, and we need to do it with the support of other searching souls and with respect and compassion for all of us. It is the only way, and it is just the beginning. And now for our meditation this morning, I offer a prayer for While in the Struggle by Marjorie Belizaire. A pair of white hands holding a cardboard sign with BLM and the Black Lives Matter fist logo. Spirit of light and love, spirit of resistance, spirit of generosity, that which serves as our conscience in this work that we do to dismantle white supremacy, to empower the marginalized, to insist that Black lives matter. We have been angered and we have been saddened. We have been pushed to the brink once more. We are also inspired and seem resolved to do better this time, to not simply get on the other side of this moment, but to get there morally healthier, to get to a safe space for Black bodies. Spirit, help us to understand that we each have a role in justice work, for our liberations are tied to one another's. Give us the clarity of mind to know what our individual part is in this struggle, that there may be many ways to protest injustice. Help us find our way and commit to it. Spirits, we ask for guidance. Send us strength and endurance. Help us to give all of this and hold back nothing, for precious lives depend on it. We will be imperfect. Rest assured that we will mess up over and over again, and we must do it anyway. May we summon the courage to tear down this system of injustice and get busy creating a world community with justice for all. May it be so. Amen. And now we will hear from Sarah.
March on Washington, 1963. I Had a Dream speech has been a motivating factor in my involvement with Beloved Conversations. I was 16 and a witness on August 28th, 1963. The magic of the crowds, the Black and white faces together. the feeling in my body of intense heat, amazing music, speakers in front of the Lincoln Memorial in DC. Dr. Martin and I have the same birthday. In the Beloved Conversations references, I found his speech and read that he was almost finished with this speech. And Mahalia Jackson from behind spontaneously shouted to him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin, tell him about the dream." At that moment, everything changed. He then looked over at her and back then at his papers and moved them to the left. He grabbed the lectern on the podium and began to speak and began to speak spontaneously and extemporaneously. His whole body language shifted. He became more relaxed. And then, as some Baptist preachers do, he took his right foot and pulled it up against his left leg and began to preach. He spoke from his heart and out spilled his dream. I speak to you today from my heart. After days of trying to formulate something meaningful, intellectual, and just perfect for this occasion, and none of that worked. So instead, I stand here with my hands on my heart and vulnerable and doing it anyway. The reason I am here is because Ellen and Chris invited me a long ago, March 2020. It was a simple and quiet invitation to Zoom here on Sunday. The Beloved Conversations course was something I signed up for right away. What a beautiful, it was wonderful. And I loved best our small pod with Steve and Polly and Janice, a generous, kind and loving experience we had together. And I feel that the small group was very important because of the difficult issues that we discussed and needed to have time. The Making Meaning sessions online were more challenging because I thought that we should be doing more work, less spiritual stuff and more activism. Well, I kept my mouth shut, which is good, and decided to just go along with what was happening. And now looking back, I see that what is most important for me is to have a strong spiritual base. I now see that that is what helps me to slow down and to stop trying to make things happen. I now see that doing this work from this place is hard. It's hard, but it's great learning. And it's people first, then facts. Connection, community, and heart is where my growth is right now. One beloved conversation activity, and they had many, that stands out for me was an invitation to meditate on an ancestor. I had much resistance to this, as usual, but I did it anyway. It led me through a series of steps, and this is what happened when I surrendered. A letter from MLK Jr. Dear Sarah, I want you to know that I support all of your efforts to look squarely at racism as a white person in this country. This is not an easy path that you have chosen. I feel that the most important thing that you can do right now in the pandemic and winter of your life is to notice the war within yourself. Those times when you get upset and uncomfortable and come down really hard on yourself. You must look at this war within. Only then can you see why we are at war with each other? You must find the answer within. Warring with yourself is something to notice and observe, not push away. You must embrace it and see it clearly. This is not easy. It means you are responsible for your thoughts and beliefs. You must develop kindness and compassion for yourself when these situations in life arise, usually triggered by other people. Because we are human, these life situations will continue to come up over and over. And all you can do is sit back, breathe, and watch and observe. And see more quickly, perhaps, that it is not about that other person. It's about you. Your freedom lies in being more aware and awake when this happens, and stop pushing it away. Watch how the pain and discomfort can move and shift as you breathe and pause to watch. Question it. Is it true? What happens when I believe this thought? What happens to my thinking, my body, my emotions when I believe this? And then how would it be different for me if I couldn't believe this or think it anymore? Sarah, this is called waking up to illusion that your problems are caused by others. This will help you to look more clearly in your journey as an anti-racist and against oppression. Much love to you, Martin Luther King Jr.
So, part of each of the 6 lessons was a common worship experience titled Meaning Making. For some, it was a high point. Others found it less thrilling. And some expressed that in the chat seen by the 400 gathered for worship, with several comments like, "This is a waste of time," and "This isn't what I signed up for." It left a bad taste in my mouth, and I wondered if it would just be left there. But surprise, an email arrived announcing bonus lesson 2.5, an opportunity to practice what we're learning. This turned out to be one of the most impactful lessons of Beloved Conversations and prompted a lot of follow-up conversations in the learning pods of UUSA members. The team first spoke of the joy they had experienced seeing so many of our faces. Then, of the moments where the team was reminded of how our learning as white people happens in the moment, not just in the official material of the curriculum itself. Behaviors had emerged, and not just that chat, that echoed the very aspects of white supremacy culture that we are working to transform within ourselves and our communities. Assumed privilege is inherent in an expectation that everything in a community experience should be just as we individually want and expect it to be. The team sat on it a bit, deciding what to do. They consulted with the People of Color team, who encouraged them to speak directly about those behaviors. They insisted that, out of love for all of us participants and for themselves, boundaries must be set. So they did. They modeled how we must name behavior while valuing all people. First, they made it clear that boundary setting is not about people, but about people's behaviors. Behaviors that dehumanize, cause pain, and sow distrust. They made it clear that they know that we can choose not to allow our patterns to rule, but instead to recognize those patterns and deny them their power to disrupt. They recognize that roundabout, conflict avoiding approaches to changing such behavior had not and do not work. The answer instead is not to ignore the behavior, but to model healthy conflict, not to give in to our white patterns of being nice, but instead to be loving while being honest. So, when we recognize our patterns taking over, we need to pause, reflect on the impact we may be making, stay in our discomfort, and trust the process. And if, in spite of the best intentions, someone's patterns trick them into behaving badly, pause. Do not ignore it. With loving concern, point out the impact of the behavior and determine that such behavior will not be tolerated. For the result of giving in to our pattern of trying to be nice is to be trampled and hurt. How can we build a beloved community on such a foundation? They ended lesson 2.5 by stating again that the team is all in with us, in this with us, and is grateful for this learning community. They thanked us for our open mind and heart, even as we do hard things together.